राजपथ पे बड़ी खास मुलाकात हम कर रहे हैं तमिलनाडु के वित्त मंत्री और ह्यूमन रिसोर्सेस मैनेजमेंट मंत्री डॉक्टर पालनीवेल त्यागराजन से। जब से नई सरकार में ये आए हैं, इस सरकार को एक नया चेहरा और एक नई आवाज मिली है। इनका आप सीवी देखेंगे तो पता चलेगा कि ये बैंकर हैं, इंजीनियर हैं, इसके अलावा ये एमबीए भी हैं और सेकेंड टाइम एमएलए के तौर पर अभी वो फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर बने हैं और देश के जो जरूरी मुद्दे हैं उस पर अपनी राय को आर्टिकुलेट कर रहे हैं। इस वक्त जो प्रोपेगेंडा लेड नैरेटिव है उसमें एक इंटेलिजेंस वाली बात लोग सुन रहे हैं और उनका नोटिस कर रहे हैं। बहुत स्वागत है आपका डॉक्टर त्यागराजन, आपने हमारे लिए वक्त निकाला। Hello and welcome to the Quint, Bloomberg Quint and the Hindi Quint. We have a very special guest today, Tamil Nadu Finance Minister and Human Resources Management Minister, Dr. Palanivel Tyagarajan. Everyone has noticed his articulate views on various national issues, and it is very important and pertinent to have a perspective from him on Tamil Nadu economy and COVID management. Dr. Tyagarajan, welcome on the show.
Welcome, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me.
First thing first, because your government constituted a very interesting advisory panel of globally acclaimed economists, including Nobel laureate Esther Duflo. What was the thought behind it? This is a great thing to do, but in the context of a state government, it is a kind of a global advisory council which can actually advise everyone. So what is the thought, what inputs you are giving, and what are they advising?
So basically, I think everything starts with the leader and the leader's philosophy of how to run a government. Our chief minister is very clear that we want the best inputs from a diversity of perspectives, not just one kind of advice. So as you may know, or rather my chief minister, though it's my department, the planning department, my chief minister constituted the State Planning Development Council, which is the substitute of the Planning Commission. Like the planning commission that was in Delhi and got replaced with the Niti Aayog. So in that sense, this is just another step. And in that state planning council, we had very local perspectives, economists, industrialists, and MLA, other professors from the Madras Institute of Development Studies and so forth. So I think that was intended for a more kind of regular perspective. And the chief minister was very keen that we should also have a global perspective because in some sense Tamil Nadu is quite integrated into the global economy. And so he had asked me to constitute this. He gave me some names I suggested. But he was very keen that the collective should reflect our economic and political philosophy. And so we wanted to make sure that the makeup had quite a range of diversity.
Right. And then I read about the state of state finances, and you mentioned about some CAG reports that were not tabled in the assembly. Have you tabled? Are you going to table it? And what is worrisome about
it? These reports relate to the financial year 17-18 onwards. Altogether, there were five reports that were received by the government of Tamil Nadu starting the 6th of March 2020. Now, there's already an issue. Something is structurally wrong when the financial year 17-18, which finishes in March, doesn't have a CAG report till 24 months later. Normal lag should be 12 months or so. So already there were some problems, I think, with regime change in the union government and CAG's role being changed and all that. It was delayed unduly. But what is alarming, as I pointed out in the House today, is that those reports were not tabled in the House. The normal rule is that as soon as those are received by the government, they should be tabled in the House, because the minute they're tabled in the House, they become public documents and then get taken up by the Public Accounts Committee to resolve the disputes or the audit paragraphs. But they have not been tabled, and I don't want to get into the detail because I don't want to seem too political. But they were effectively suppressed by keeping on recirculating these things for, now about 15 months. So the point I made about those was when I was trying to, the debate started about our election manifesto said we would cut the VAT on petrol and diesel by 5 and 4 rupees. We did not say when. We just said we would cut as a way of stimulating demand and improving the economy. And so the opposition was saying, why didn't you do it now? Why didn't you do it now? And I just said three things. I said, number one, the situation of the state's finances was much worse than we thought right before we came to office and had access to confidential information. Number two, that the second wave was not upon us when we made the manifesto promise. And so we have spent almost 20,000 crores, or about 1% of our GSDP, or about almost 15% of our discretionary spending that we did not expect to spend, or that we were not sure we would have to spend. And number three, even after this whole manifesto preparation started, the union government in this February's budget shifted more of the excise into cess, and therefore cut back more of the revenues to be given to the states through the fuel excise. So I said, you put all these together, and so we can't do it now. We'll definitely have to pick. You can't do all expenditures at one time. We picked the bottom of the pyramid, stimulate demand, 4,000 rupees in the hands of every poor family or lower income family, plus things we had not had in the manifesto about groceries and stuff, because we didn't know the second wave would be coming at that time. So, we have spent all this money, so we'll do this later. And the former chief minister, now opposition leader, in his speech said, did you not know this to be true? And you say that the state's finances are worse than you thought they were. How can they be? Because they're audited. And I said, well, I've always said that your revised estimates and all these left holes. I can show mathematically there's 30, 40, 50,000 of hidden debt. But what I did not have the luxury of was the 3 years of audit reports that you suppressed. Mm-hmm. So if I don't have a clear picture, it's really up to you to explain why I don't have a clear picture, because you have not released the audit reports. You say, how can audited statements be wrong? I say they are not audited. You have not yet given us the audited statements. So that was the reason we got into that debate.
Interesting. I want to understand how you are going to attract investments. But before that, because you mentioned about the restructuring of state debt, you spoke to Bloomberg TV, and my colleague Ira Dugal wanted me to ask you this question, that what is in your mind when you talk about one-time restructuring? Because this is unusual.
Yeah, so we are at a point where the interest burden has become onerous. Now, let's start from the basics. The debt, which used to be about 16, 17% of GSDP, has now shot to 26, 27, 28. And it was already scraping 25 before COVID. Mm-hmm. The interest payments, which were 11% of revenue, have shot to about 20. But there's two effects. One, the interest payments have gone up. Two, the revenues have gone down. So the ratio has skewed twice. So it is unsustainable. That's why the last 2-3 years, this ADMK government has been borrowing 1.5% of GSDP just to cover the revenue deficit, and then only being able to invest 1% or 1.25% into infrastructure and capital investment. As a consequence, growth has slid, which is what happens everywhere. If you slow down investment, your growth will slide. So we want to reverse this. From priority for me is not about the debt. I mean, let's put it in perspective. If I think this is bad and it's in violation of the FRA, well, the union government has been running 6, 7, 8% deficits for the last 2, 3, 4 years, sometimes hidden, sometimes open. And the debt to GDP is somewhere around 90%. So it's not as if we are profligate compared to them, but compared to where we used to be, we are much worse. And the main concern for me is not even the debt. It is the interest. So we cannot afford to pay 20% interest, 20% of our revenues in interest, because it sets off a vicious cycle. No democratic elected government can cut their spending down that much. And fixed costs are so high. So at this point, because our revenue is low, because our interest is high, we are squeezed. So those are the two things we have to fix. Fixing the revenues back up to 10.5% of GSDP they used to be. From the 7th they fell to, pre-COVID, and the 6th they are now, is the highest priority. That we need to fix. And we are working on that through various heads, including improved collection of commercial taxes, improved mining revenues, all the things which the earlier government rejected. I can go into a bit more detail if you want in a minute. But the second is to stop the interest payments being so high. So there's only two ways to do that. The first is to refinance your loans at lower rates of interest. We are doing a lot of that. In fact, we've already done a bunch of that at the Tamil Nadu Electricity Board and affiliated entities. Mm-hmm. And we are talking to a lot of people about refinancing some of the state debt in different ways to bring the total interest burden down. There are many, as you know, the world is awash with liquidity. All banks are flush with deposits. Markets are at record highs, even as the economy, at least in most parts of the world till 6 months ago, was in the doldrums. So one is to bring the payments down without changing the total debt. The second is to reduce the debt altogether. We're going to reduce the debt altogether. The most conventional way, which the union government says every year, and which some other states have started to talk about now, is to sell some assets.
Mm-hmm.
So the only point I have made in multiple places is I am not eager to sell assets till I have fixed what I see as a broken system. In my opinion, and in the opinion of the CAG and the 15th Finance Commission and the RBI and everybody, if we're supposed to get 1 rupee, we're only getting 65, 70 paisa in revenue. Now I say two more things. We are effectively, in my opinion, again, getting only about 65, 70 paisa impact when we try to spend 1 rupee. There's many problems on the way out. So I got to fix that too. And then over and above that, there's a fundamental restructuring of administration to be done. We are running almost 35% vacancy in the staffing of the government, and yet salaries, pensions, and interest and non-wage O&M take up 100% of the state's own revenues. So these are some problems. Now, you know as well as I do that were I to suddenly liquidate 30 or 40,000 crores of assets and bring it into this would be the excuse to not do the hard work of all the other things I've told you about. So, of course, I want to bring the interest down. I think in the short term, I can do it by just re-interest rate couponing the debt.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then in the longer term, if we need to, we will sell assets, but we will certainly optimize the use of government assets like many other governments are doing. Telangana, for example, is creating a land bank. We don't need to create land bank sell, but we have other reasons for which we need to fundamentally change the land management system to a level of a Singapore or something like that, which we will. So these are different parts of the restructuring. We got to restructure the functioning of the government, restructure the revenue management, restructure the interest payments, and if need be for that, restructure the debt, and also restructure the way we use our resources and hold them. And they're different, somewhat related, but somewhat different.
Yeah. So, of course, this will create an environment where people will be interested to invest in your state. But looking at the overall context and the constraints, what do you think are going to be the key 1 or 2 areas where you think you will be able to attract investment, and what kind of timeline you would kind of plan for yourself, looking at the pandemic especially?
Yeah, listen, let's, if you don't mind, I'll take a bit of a different route here, just so we've never met before. So let me say something I haven't said repeatedly in other places.
Sure.
At a macro level, there are 2 ways to look at it. One is kind of steady state, and one is kind of contemporary, at this instance in time. In that sense, I would say steady state, we have always had the great luxury in Tamil Nadu, at least for the last 20, 30 years, of being a attractive investment destination within the context of India. Educated workforce, big industrial base, relatively low inequality. Therefore, you have everybody participating in the system. High participation in higher education, good human development indicators, etc. And that's why we reflect. At one point we were about twice the percentage of India's manufacturing as we are of its population. We're about 6 or 6.5% of its population, or maybe slightly less. And we were 12.5 of India's manufacturing output. And so I think that's a kind of long-term thing. And as I said before, even if you have 5 or 7 years of mismanagement, it's hard to wipe out 100 years of progress and 30, 40 years of acceleration in 1 year, 1 term, or even 2 terms. So steady state within the context of investment into India, Tamil Nadu will remain to be one of the most investment-friendly destinations. At this part of the cycle level, as I say, India still got room, because the whole China concentration is coming down. People are looking for alternatives. International trade wars are heating up or stay heated. They were very heated and they still come down, but still a bit heated. And I think the phenomenal growth of Bangladesh in particular, and to some extent Pakistan in the last couple of years, shows that there's pent-up demand for South Asian investment. And since we have not proven that attractive, they have taken advantage of that. On the relative state basis, Tamil Nadu lost out a lot of opportunity to Andhra and Telangana in the last 5-6 years. And I feel confident that we can reverse a lot of that because people are starting to come and talk to us now after the new regime. So, there's a steady state advantage. There's a cyclical opportunity. The window is not yet closed at a global level for India. And there's a increasing cyclical opportunity for Tamil Nadu relative to other states. That's my view.
Right. Now I want to shift my focus on the federalism and the state and the government of India relationship, because you are trying to trigger a new conversation around the whole subject of how state and center should work together. But before I come to that, because there is a new development today, your chief minister has written letters to 9 chief ministers about the issue of minor ports. There is a proposal to amend Port Act and take some powers in the hand of union government again. Would you like to comment on that?
I don't want. I have not seen the letter. I was in the assembly all day. I know that he has written. I have not seen the letter, but I want to make a broader statement, if that's okay. I think there's a kind of tendency to drag us all to what effectively starts to become the movement headed by the Honorable Prime Minister, who was one of the greatest champions of federalism when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat for 13 years. Now, all of a sudden, you find that the union government wants to take over everything. They want all the revenues to go to them. They have shifted, the 23% of total revenues collected now go in the form of cesses and surcharges that don't get shared to the states. They want to control the money, they want to control the distribution, and they want to control the policy, right? Agriculture is a state subject. They pass farm laws. Health is a state subject. The Honorable Finance Minister says so. But then he says, we will tell you, what exam to run, etc., etc. So this distinction of what should be a state subject, what should be a concurrently subject, education. They say, no, we are going to tell you how to run a national education policy. So this gathering of all power, all money, everything into the union government, even if it was healthy, even if it produced results, maybe we could live with it. But what it's effectively doing is dragging us all to the lowest common denominator, because neither Gujarat nor the union nor the states which produce 200 or 250 of the 300 MPs of the NDA or BJP and the NDA government have any indicator that is comparable to us. In education, they're half a quarter of where we are. In GDP, excluding Gujarat, the rest like Bihar, UP and all that, much, much worse, Madhya Pradesh. In women's empowerment, in social development, in infant mortality, you pick in number of doctors, you pick anything. And so now we have the worry that are we being forced to the lowest common denominator by people who are 10, 20, 30, 40 years behind us in progress, insisting that they want to take over all our democratic rights, all our extra constitutionally, I may add, in many ways.
Yes.
And in direct contrast to what the Honorable Prime Minister had been saying for 13 years. Right? So, whenever I get a chance, I put out a slide, I'll send it to you if you want, of his statements while he was Chief Minister of Gujarat. And he asked questions like, how can the GST ever work? What about our rights? And he says, you say you give us money. Whose money is it? Is it your Mamaji's money? It's our money. So all these things that he said as Chief Minister, he's going and doing the exact opposite when he's the Prime Minister.
So now the trend is very clear that the government of India wants more and more centralization. You are triggering a new debate, and many more states would understand this. It is not state versus state. It is all states together, and then you talk to Delhi. How are you going
let me give you an interesting dilemma. Today I did an analysis and presented it at the assembly in a different context. I said in 2014, the union government was collecting about 6 rupees and 35 paisa in taxes on 1 liter of petrol. And the rest of our states together were splitting about 3 rupees and something, of which Tamil Nadu used to get about 15 paisa a liter. But UP used to get 70 paisa a liter. And Bihar used to get 33, 35 paisa a liter. Because at that time, about 90% of the tax was collected as excise and then divided between the center and the states on 13th Finance Commission formula and all that stuff. And 10% was collected as cess and kept only by the union. stage by stage by stage, with big jumps in 17, 20, and now 21. As of February 21, 4% of the 33 rupees of taxes, 32 rupees 90 paisa of taxes, is collected as excise, 1 rupee and 40 paisa. And 31.50 is taken as cess and surcharge only by the union government. So now if you actually split all this, the 15 or 16 paisa that Tamil Nadu used to get has gone down to 2 paisa. That's bad enough for us. The 70 paisa that UP used to get has gone down to 10 paisa. The 32, 33 paisa per liter that Bihar used to get has gone down to 4 or 5 paisa. My question is, when we in Tamil Nadu say we are for states' rights, don't do this, don't shift it to excise, don't shift it to cess, why are people suffering, etc.? Why are we not hearing similar voices from UP and Bihar and Gujarat and other places that are suffering the same or worse than us? After all, I've lost 12, 13 paisa a liter. UP has lost 60 paisa a liter. Where is the, so it worries me. It worries me that for the sake of a political alignment, state leaderships in the BJP state seem to be giving up their people's benefits and rights and, priorities. Right?
Are you not hopeful that if you take initiative, most states would join this conversation? You should call a conclave of all the states.
Sir, in my statement, in my opening statement or maiden statement to the GST Council, I made 2 points. I said the avenues for, I said the GST Council has become all powerful, all encompassing, all everything, which is not good for the country. And I believe that because nature abhors a vacuum, the GST Council has become so powerful because what should otherwise be state-to-state dialogue and state-to-union dialogue across a variety of subjects far beyond goods and services tax. Because those avenues have been shut down, because they don't work, because the erstwhile Council of States doesn't meet, because there are not regularly scheduled relationship meetings between the states and each of the states and the union. Therefore, we have no other avenue but to use the GST, and this is far from optimal. So it was my stated request at that point that we must create more avenues of communication, both state to state, which is something within our power. At some point, I'm sure my chief minister will call a meeting of the states, and not just the non-BJP states, but all states, to come and talk about federalism and states' rights. And we need, in fact, much better dialogue between the union and each state. And I have said that in an interview in the Hindustan Times today, if you have a chance to look at it, I've made the point that the union is by far the stronger partner in the relationship. They are the ones with the constitutional authority, the direct taxes, the bulk of indirect taxes, control of the GST Council, control of all kinds of things like our borrowing limits. So they should reach out and try to be good senior partners in the relationship, rather than keep the communication kind of broken and then allow these things to fester.